In 1941, the U.S. Navy gave two men 60 days to solve an almost impossible problem. They needed a structure, but not the usual kind. They needed something that 10 people with no training could assemble in a single day using only hand tools. Something light enough to load onto cargo ships, strong enough to withstand major storms, and cheap enough to produce by the thousands. No architect in the world at that time had a design that met all three requirements. The Navy assigned the task to an engineer named Peter de Jong and an architect named Otto Brandenberger from the George A. Fuller Construction Company. Both were working at a naval base in Rhode Island, at a small coastal point called Quonset, a name from the Narragansett tribe meaning boundary. 60 days later, the first kit rolled off the production line, and what came out of that factory changed the way the world thought about shelter. But what most people don't realize is that de Jong and Brandenberger didn't invent the idea from scratch, they borrowed it. In 1916, during World War I, a Canadian-American mining engineer named Peter Nissen was serving as a major in the British Royal Engineers on the Western Front. He needed portable shelters for soldiers near the front lines. In just 1 week, he built the first prototype, a half-cylinder of corrugated steel that 6 men could assemble in 4 hours. By September 1916, Nissen huts were in mass production. More than 100,000 were built during World War I. The Quonset hut was essentially the Nissen hut redesigned for large-scale production. Bigger, stronger, easier to transport, and easier to assemble. Still that same brilliant idea, but scaled up for a bigger war. Over the next 4 years, the military built more than 170,000 of them. They were shipped to the icy Aleutian Islands, to the jungles of the Pacific, and to the deserts of North Africa. From Arctic blizzards to tropical cyclones, the same simple structure stood firm against everything. Many of those original huts built more than 80 years ago are still standing today. So why did we stop building them? This is the story of the Quonset hut, how it was designed, why it worked so well, how it sheltered millions after the war, and why such a durable, cheap, and simple structure was quietly pushed aside to make way for buildings that cost 10 times more but last only half as long. So what exactly is a Quonset hut? Imagine a tin can sliced lengthwise and placed upside down on the ground. That's it. A half circle of corrugated steel set on a flat floor. No right angles, no complicated edges, no fussy roof joints. The original 1,941 design was 16 feet wide and 36 feet long, roughly the size of a large single-car garage. The arched roof had an 8-foot radius, giving about 6 feet of headroom at the side walls before the curve rose toward the center. But the Navy quickly realized they needed more space. By 1942, the standard model had expanded to 20 feet wide and 48 feet long. That gave 960 square feet of open floor space. No support columns. No interior walls dividing the room, just one large open area under a steel shell. The kit came with everything needed to assemble it. The frame consisted of curved steel ribs forming the skeleton, corrugated steel sheets for the outer shell, 1-inch, tongue-and-groove plywood flooring, wood fiber insulation sandwiched between the outer steel and an inner masonite lining, plus doors, windows, and even a chimney. What particularly impressed the engineers was that the improved design could be assembled using 2 arch sections instead of 3. This shortened assembly time and reduced the number of bolts needed. It was also about 35% lighter for shipping and 60% cheaper to produce than the first version. In terms of cost, the original small model was around $800 in 1941, equivalent to about $17,000 today. The larger standard model cost around $1,000. Meanwhile, the average cost to build a conventional house in the U.S. today is about $162 per square foot. For a 960 square foot house, the total would exceed $155,000. The Quonset hut delivered the same floor area for about $1,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's still under $20,000. Same usable space, a fraction of the cost, yet it could withstand conditions that would demolish a wood frame house. The Navy went on to develop the design for 86 different official purposes: barracks, hospitals, bakeries, dental clinics, classrooms, chapels, mess halls, and storage. They even created a version called the Elephant Hut that was 40 feet wide and 100 feet long. The largest Quonset hut ever built during the war was on Guam, a 54,000 square foot warehouse assembled from prefabricated kits. And here's where it gets really interesting. The shape of the Quonset hut isn't just simple, it's one of the most resilient forms in construction. The reason has been known for thousands of years: the arch. The Romans used arches to build aqueducts that still stand after more than 2,000 years. Medieval builders used them in great cathedrals that survived earthquakes, wars, and centuries of harsh weather. The arch isn't a stylistic choice, it's an engineering principle. When weight presses down on a flat roof, all that force transfers straight down the walls. If the walls can't take it, the roof collapses. So conventional buildings need trusses, rafters, load-bearing walls, and lots of internal support. A flat roof fights gravity, so it needs a lot of help. An arch works differently. It redirects compressive forces along its curve. The weight spreads outward and downward, distributing across the entire structure instead of concentrating at one point. Every inch of the arch shares the load. Imagine holding a flat sheet of paper between your hands and pressing down with your finger. It bends immediately. But if you curve that same sheet into an arch and press again, it holds. Same paper, same force. The only difference is the shape. That simple physics lesson is the engineering secret of the Quonset hut. When you combine that arch with corrugated steel, the ribs in the sheets add stiffness without adding weight. A flat sheet of steel bends easily. A corrugated sheet resists bending in one direction while remaining flexible in the other. Combine those corrugations with the arched form, and you get a structure that is almost impossibly hard to destroy. That's why Quonset huts need no internal support columns. The curved steel shell is the entire load-bearing structure. Roof, walls, and frame are all one piece. There are no joints between walls and roof because there are no separate walls. No separate roof, just one continuous arch. And this gives the Quonset hut three advantages that conventional buildings struggle to match. First is wind resistance. A flat wall acts like a sail. Wind hits it, loads it up, and tries to rip the roof off. That's what happens in hurricanes and tornadoes. The connection between wall and roof is the weakest point, and often where the building fails. A curved surface lets wind slide past. There's no place for wind to grab or pull. In wind tunnel tests, arched steel buildings have withstood speeds over 150 miles per hour. Some reinforced versions have survived full-category hurricanes. One Quonset hut owner in Florida watched a Category 4 storm tear the roofs off surrounding houses. His Quonset hut stood without a single dent in the steel. Second is snow load. Snow slides off a curved roof. It can't pile up like on a flat surface. In many parts of Canada and the northern U.S., builders choose Quonset arches because they handle snow loads that would crush conventional straight-walled buildings. Third is earthquake resistance. Quonset huts are light and flexible. When the ground shakes, the structure absorbs energy instead of cracking. No rigid corners to snap. No brittle joints to fail. Wind, snow, earthquakes, major storms, the same structure handles all four. Not with expensive technology or space-age materials, but with a shape humans figured out before electricity existed. When World War II ended in 1945, the military faced a problem. They had tens of thousands of surplus Quonset huts. They no longer needed them, so they sold them to American civilians for about $1,000 each. And for a brief time, something remarkable happened. Returning veterans who couldn't afford houses bought Quonset huts and turned them into homes. Farmers used them for barns, workshops, and equipment storage. Universities overwhelmed with students thanks to the GI Bill used them for dorms and classrooms. The University of Iowa even built an entire married student housing area called Quonset Park, using Quonset huts. In Los Angeles, a veterans housing project called Roger Young Village used them to shelter families with nowhere else to go. In Hawaii, they became so common they got a local name, kamaboko houses, because they resembled blocks of kamaboko, a traditional fish cake. The Strand Steel Company issued a 1,946 press release listing 257 different ways people were using Quonset huts. Homes, churches, repair shops, milking barns, grocery stores, Sunday schools. Sherwin-Williams even created a special paint line called Quonset, made just for covering the steel. In Nashville, Tennessee, the Bradley brothers bought a surplus Quonset hut in the 1950s and turned it into Columbia Records Studio B. That building later became the foundation of Music Row. Some of the most famous country songs in American history were recorded inside a $1,000 surplus military hut. But there's one thing almost no one mentions. At about $1.50 per square foot, the Quonset hut was the cheapest sturdy building available in America at the time. It could be erected in just a few days. It withstood weather that would destroy conventional homes. It required almost no maintenance, and anyone who wanted one could buy it immediately. For a few years after the war, it looked like the Quonset hut might completely change the way Americans built homes. But that didn't happen. If Quonset huts were so strong, cheap, and accessible, why did we abandon them? The answer isn't that people found something better, it's that they found something that looked better. The first problem was psychological. Veterans didn't want to live in structures identical to where they slept during the war. A Quonset hut wasn't a home, it was a barracks. It reminded them of mud, sweat, and lousy meals. Soldiers had spent years dreaming of a real house with proper walls and a white picket fence. The last thing they wanted was another tin can. The second problem was social status. In post-war America, your house reflected who you were. A Cape Cod with shutters projected a certain image. A Quonset hut said something too, but not in a positive way. A hut didn't carry the social status of a proper house. The third problem was practical. Rectangular furniture doesn't fit curved walls. Beds, cabinets, and washing machines had to be placed away from the edges. The 960 square feet on paper felt smaller in reality because the sloping edges reduced usable space. A 20-foot wide Quonset hut always felt smaller than its actual dimensions. And then came the decisive factor, the post-war housing boom. After World War II, developers like Levitt and Sons figured out how to mass-produce conventional houses. Levittown in New York began selling identical tract homes in 1947. They were affordable, quick to build, and looked like real houses. Wood frame construction was easy to learn. Lumber was cheap. The government provided low-interest mortgages through the GI Bill, letting veterans buy traditional homes with almost no down payment. The construction industry quickly standardized around wood framing. Building codes were written for it. Contractors were trained in it. Supply chains formed around it. Quonset huts didn't fit any of those systems. So one of the most durable, affordable, weather-resistant building types ever designed was quietly sidelined. Not because it failed, but because it didn't look the part. And here's the cost of that decision. The average American home today is built with wood framing, wood studs, plywood sheathing, asphalt shingle roof. Construction costs about $162 per square foot, not including land. The average total exceeds $428,000. It takes 7 to 12 months to build. It requires licensed electricians, plumbers, framers, roofers, and a general contractor to manage them all. So what do you get for that money? A structure that the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency says is prone to catastrophic failure in high winds. A building that can lose its roof in a Category 1 storm, starting at around 74 miles per hour. A home that demands constant maintenance, new roof every 15 to 20 years, new siding, termite treatment, repainting. Meanwhile, near the Korean DMZ, the U.S. military still uses Quonset huts at Camp Casey. In Alaska, huts from World War I are still standing. The CB Museum in North Kingstown, Rhode Island preserves 7 vintage Quonset huts rescued from demolition. The U.S. Department of Energy still uses them for shops and storage at the Nevada National Security Site. A well-maintained Quonset hut can last 50 to 80 years, and many experts say even longer. The galvanized corrugated steel resists rust, insects, and fire. No wood to rot, no shingles to replace, no rafters to fail. Modern versions have solved every complaint from the 1940s. Spray foam insulation can reach R30 or higher. Vertical sidewalls reclaim the lost floor space. Custom end walls, windows, and skylights make the interior look like a normal building. You can even assemble one with a few friends over a weekend. What about cost? A basic modern Quonset hut kit starts under $10,000. A fully equipped 960 square foot model, equivalent to a small house, is usually under $30,000 for materials before site prep and utilities. Yet we spend around $428,000 on homes that can be destroyed in a storm. An alternative has been sitting in plain sight for 80 years. The Quonset Hut was designed in 60 days by two men assigned to solve an apparently impossible problem. What they created was deployed across every theater of World War II, survived Arctic blizzards and Pacific typhoons, sheltered millions of veterans after the war, and even helped launch the careers of country music legends. Yet we ignored it simply because it didn't look like a house. Roman arches, corrugated steel, prefabricated kits, none of it was new, none of it was complicated. None of it required an architecture degree to understand. All it required was the willingness to choose function over appearance, strength over status, durability over decoration. The original World War II Quonset Hut now sits in a museum, while the average American home sits under a 30-year mortgage. One has lasted more than 80 years. The other needs a new roof before the loan is paid off. If you found this content helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel. We explore forgotten building knowledge, lost construction techniques, and old methods that still outperform modern ones. Share this with someone tired of paying $500,000 for a house that can't survive a storm. Subscribe to keep exploring what we left behind.